lucky she's my friend. Otherwise, it would be a lot. Yes.
The research surface, it's going to end in May, so the March dates here are good. So you don't have to do your online fundraising. I was supposed to be the first on there, so I have the best interest.
So they are going to do the tour.
In March, they'll be here, but they finish in May.
I'm the early bird.
What's the story? I'm the early bird, Woody? Sure.
I said it in the public channel from the backside. Right.
Everybody loves it. All my areas.
Hope that they go take a tour of their building. Have you toured their headquarters in Norfolk? Have you? Well, everybody did, so. They do a good job. They got mad at me because I supported. I heard the news, it was all over the news. A person complained about girls.
I know, I tried to call you yesterday, but you were slammed.
And they use something to report your animal control.
I think I have talked about it.
And I saw this is
Come down like twice a year.
Oh, good, yeah, please do.
went on the front porch of the person, and they had their dog,
Sure.
and they had and they took the dog to the front porch, euthanized the dog, and they sent the family a food basket of flowers. Keep that up.
That's a delicate private stash. Nice.
Thank you.
Sooner or later, man. Yeah, I get down there.
You back? All right.
I'm gonna give you something else. I've got it up here. Hold on one sec. Appreciate it.
I will call the committee meeting to order. We have two items on the agenda today. I believe we have the Secretary of Transportation, Aubrey Lane, is first up. And Aubrey will give us an overview of all things transportation that have transpired in the last 4+ years. Aubrey?
And I will do that very quickly, Mr. Chair. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me here today, members of the committee. I want
lot of what we've accomplished has been a result of people in this room, collaboration with the governor's administration and you, and I want to thank you in advance. What I hope to do today is to tell you sort of where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. Let me first start in terms of what we found before 2013. As you know, we were one of the first administrations to come in with a little bit more money because of the hard work done in 2013 by Governor McDonald. We had a little bit more money to spend. So we knew we had to be good fiduciaries. And I was involved, as many of you know, in the Transportation Board since 2009. So I sort of had an understanding of what was going on, but it was very subjective. Mostly were engineering-based solutions. A lot of politically driven process, not necessarily just politically from the executive branch, but politically on the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Led by intuition in that we thought these were good projects, and I think we firmly believed they were, but it was really what I thought versus what somebody else thought. A big part, we were only partially funding projects, and that's one thing I really want to hammer on as we go through. A theme is we've moved from allocating money to delivering projects, and I'll explain that as we go. But we were allocating projects because money's around because we wanted to keep everybody happy, so to speak.
Secretary, if I could, for those who went back to their offices, they would have found this document in their office today.
Yes.
And this is light reading, second year. This is the second round, if you want to use that term, of smart scale monies. And that was the taker of that was Stolly.
Oh, yes.
And so, going around, but it is something they can take home if they're anxious about what came out of the scoring process. So this is evidence of that hard work.
That's right, Mr. Chair. I was going to get to that as where we are today as compared to where we are. Yes, sir. Thank you for saying that. It really was somewhat opaque as the booklet that the chairman just held up. Most of those scores are, it wasn't even the scores, most of the projects didn't come out till 4 or 5 months from now, and then we turned around and voted on them in 1 month, and there wasn't a whole lot of deliberation. It was actually a lot controlled by VDOT, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but just how things had happened. A lot of things had been delegated to VDOT, some intentionally, some unintentionally, and it was locally driven. And it was a lot, particularly at VDOT, in terms of working with the district administrators and local decisions. But we worked together, and we were able to capitalize on the new funding with some new legislation. The chairman, first of all, mentioned House Bill 2, which we now call Smart Scale, not to be confused with House Bill 2 down south of here, but now Smart Scale. And 2 other pieces, House Bill 1886 and 1887, which I'm really going to focus on today. But we renewed the transportation program by providing the new resources for all modes of transportation, and that really started with House Bill 2313, Governor McDonald. We reformed it by requiring the use of outcome-based prioritization. And I think we are the first in the nation to do that, really use it. There are others that say they do it, but they don't use it. And we increased accountability and transparency, and we increased the independence of the CTB. And then, of course, we refocused it because now we've aligned our income streams with the needs in the Commonwealth. And we did that by updating a decades-old allocation formula with some new streams. Today, we are using objective decisions, as I mentioned, outcome-based solutions. It's a data-driven process, and that doesn't necessarily doesn't mean we don't use good judgment, but we're starting from data. It's led by analytics, and I think you'll see that as we go through this presentation. In this last round of scoring, there were over 800 people that were involved in that process. It's built from the ground up. A key component is we now fully fund projects, which brings a lot more certainty to our program, not just for our agencies, but for all the contractors around the state to plan their business. The local institutions and counties and towns now know they're going to get projects done. I believe it's very transparent from everything from the CTB meetings being live streamed to all the public comment and hearings we have around the Commonwealth, to everything that the chairman just held up in his hand is now online, so every citizen can see every score of every project that we now do. It's It's an independent Commonwealth Transportation Board. I found out how independent it was this morning, Mr. Chairman, on a recommendation I made. They chose not to go another way, but I think that's the way it should go, being an independent board. And most importantly, too, it's regionally driven. I learned when I was on the CTB that our transportation issues were not so much local as they were regions. Within regions and connecting regions, obviously it all starts local, but that's really where what drives our economy, is regional connections. So today, as the chairman again held up, our projected project recommendations were released today. That compares, and it was done intentionally to release them later in the year after the General Assembly session left. Now we have 5 months of public review and comment, where before, at the most, we'd have 60 days, and that's if you could have figured out what actually changed from the previous year, if you tried to look at an old 6-year plan. And we think the project information and scores are easily accessible. I mentioned they're online. You have the documents. And as compared to trying to interpret a 6-year plan this thick and trying to explain it. I also would want to point out, Mr. Chairman, we debuted yesterday at the Commonwealth Transportation Board. We now, and I'll come back another time or give you the app. Any individual can get this app and click on any project and see its status. If it's on budget, if it's on schedule, and so any citizen will be able to track VDOT. And I think it just leads to more transparency to better decisions.
Secretary, I know several months ago we talked about the dashboard. I guess this is an updated dashboard that's going to be a little more accurate and give a better reflection of actually what's going on.
That's correct, and it'll be a mobile app where anybody can access it and look at it, and we hope to continue to improve it to be intuitive from the standpoint of saying, you know what, you're supposed to be a contract award, it's 2 weeks out, better be getting ready to be a contract award, that type of thing, helping us drive, where before, it simply was left to VDOT. And I'm not saying that was bad, but I'm saying a lot of things happened that never, if you were over budget, you just moved an allocation over here. That's not to say they were doing anything improper, that's just the way they were done. And also, this new legislation helped us really identify what I believe was the intent of the legislature in the laws that you would pass. That is, the Commonwealth Transportation Board is the one responsible for programming of transportation funds and developing the long-range plan. It should be a proactive process that we use to guide our decisions, not simply allocating some monies and hoping we're somehow meeting some of those parts. VDOT is now responsible, and has always been, its operations, maintenance, construction management, and safety of the driving public and traveling public. That's what they need to be focused on. And I'm very comfortable Commissioner Kilpatrick understands that. And this past year, VDOT let $2.655 billion in contracts, the most in its history. The most in its history. The real payoff to all this hard work is getting those contracts built, getting those projects built. And that's what VDOT ought to be focused on, and I'm happy to say that they have really embellished that role. And certainly the Department of Rail and Public Transit is responsible for the administration of our transit grants and rail improvements awarded by the board. Now, over time, those roles and responsibilities became misaligned with what I believe was the Code of Virginia. Actually, it was the Secretary's office and VDOT drove the selection and the planning with minimal input from the board, and I would also say the public. That's just the way it was done. I've served now under 3 governors, and I know of at least 4 governors' lists. In fact, when I came here and we started talking, they said, well, what are we going to do all these projects on the governor's list? I'm not saying that was bad. I'm saying with limited resources, it was not the way we should have been allocating across the Commonwealth. And it didn't matter if it was Democrat or Republican, that's just the way the process worked. I also want to say, I actually believe that was done with all good intentions. All good intentions. It's just that with limited resources, when you don't have data-driven and you are continually trying to satisfy people, we weren't delivering projects, we were allocating money around. And as I said, the stakeholders became focused on getting money. I remember I was on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and and we get $50 million and everybody was happy, but it was spread between 10 contracts and we didn't get any projects done. But for some reason, we thought we were all happy because we got some money allocated to us. Now, as I said, that is not the case anymore. We have increased dependence of the board. We now fully fund projects. The smart scale and requirements for the board if they want us to modify the smart scale, they have to stand up and tell you. They have to do it in public. There may be good reasons why they want to do that. But it needs to be in public so that the public understands where their money's going. We no longer have a one-day or half-a-day meeting. These meetings are 2 full days, and they are live streamed, so anybody in the Commonwealth can see how these things are being deliberated. And we have used the Office of Intermodal Planning to assist the board in its development of its long-range plan and recommendations. It's about governance. PDOT doesn't pick the projects, it helps to build them, but it's a separate scoring, and then the board makes the final decision on how the money is allocated. In the first round of Smart Scale, this is last year, the book you received this time last year, we had 2,327 applications, roughly 287 of them met the long-range plan, and I think that's important to remember. Now, the long-range plan means something. You've got to be in that plan. I stood up here before and said that we used to do that every couple of years at CTP, and we say we're finished, we put it up on a shelf, and we never looked at it again. Not the case now. That's the first screen to make sure are we meeting the long-range plan. We allocated $1.7 billion last year to 156 projects, and you can see the average request was a little under $10 million, from a low of $160,000 to $300 million. I'm happy to report the process was geographically dispersed. We took us 2 years to develop this. Hundreds of meetings, hundreds of public meetings, and I would literally say probably over 1,000 actual other local meetings, meeting with groups, and helping this build it from the ground up. Because we wanted to be something that worked just as well in Bristol as it did in Crystal City. That was the intent of this, so that we could somehow make an objective determination on how to spend our monies. And like I said, I think we accomplished that. Round 2, which you just have, we'll be making that decision over the next 5 months. We have $1 billion available to award. We received 436 applications. The request skyrocketed to $9.2 billion, which with cost that was supporting projects of over $12 billion. And the scores in the recommended scenario were released yesterday, and you have those in your hands as we speak. The next graph will then show how we got to the allocation. We had the request of $9.25 billion. You can see how they broke down by district across the Commonwealth, the 9 districts. And you can see it was a robust participation for people putting in applications across the Commonwealth. The average scores this year were much higher than the scores last year. I think that is due to the fact that people really engaged in the process and understood the process as we went through. Now, we had a couple of extraordinary events this year that allowed us to allocate more monies than we would normally have. We started the year, and Mike was here a year ago, I said we would have about $600 million to allocate, and that's what we're going to have every 2 years going out in the future based on current revenues coming in. But we had a positive event in Northern Virginia. We had a public-private partnership where we thought we were going to have to talk from the state contribution of us putting up $300 million. As it turned out, those funds weren't required. I'll go into that a little bit later. Those funds were returned back to the statewide pot across the state to be used. That's where they came from. So $300 million came back into the state because of Interstate 66. I'll get to that later, but that project's still going to be delivered. It's just that we didn't need those funds. On the other side of that, we had a project that did not go forward. That was the Virginia Beach Light Rail. That money was allocated prior to House Bill 2, our Smart Scale, but the agreement we had with you, the legislature, if that project didn't go forward, it would go into the Smart Scale process. And that's what it did, and so it went roughly 50% back into the priority statewide fund and then 50% into the district. So instead of having a little under $600 million to allocate, we had a little over $1 billion to allocate this year. Now, one of the things that my Deputy Secretary Nick Donahue did when we were going around and working on this is we said you would receive, every district would receive more monies under this than they would had they been on the old 40-30 formula. And I can stand in front of you here and say definitively for the last 2 years that has been the case. But remember, only right now, only 27.5% of the money is allocated by the Commonwealth Transportation Board, could go across all districts. 72.5% by law goes right to the districts, either through state of good repair or through the district grant program. So a lot more decision-making done regionally for those competitions, and the large statewide pot is to use for these large projects across the Commonwealth. So by law, the available funds for each district were on the left side there based on the new allocation. And then, of course, by law, the unpaid road allocation within that, each district comes across to the district grant funds that were available, again, based on the law which was approved by the legislature. Now, just to summarize a few things about the scoring results, the way it works is the 6 criteria that are used to score, the highest scoring project in each area sets the relativity for how we score the projects. In other words, the theory behind that is just because your project may not score so well this year, doesn't mean it won't score well next year, because the theory is we're taking out the higher scoring projects and we're working our way down. This year, in terms of congestion mitigation, the highest scoring project was the high-rise bridge in Hampton Roads. It set the standard. Last year it was Interstate 66, but all other congestion measures were measured from there. Safety, it was the VRE Fredericksburg line upgrade because it's taken so many cars off of 95 in that. If you go across to the environment, again, Fredericksburg line upgrade got the highest environmental because of so many cars coming off of 95. Same thing with economic development because of all the economic development that will be around those centers because of the additional line upgrade. And then in land use, it was the Columbia Pike Smart Quarter in Arlington that set the standard for the looking at. And then of course, accessibility, the I-64, 264 interchange in Hampton Roads, connecting so many major networks were what we used to score from to come up with the scores that you see in the books. Just to give you an idea of, this is not a person sitting in the back room, Nick with dark shades on back there going through all the scores. As I said, over 800 people were involved in this across the Commonwealth. And if you look at the congestion measure, the high-rise bridge, for instance, now these are the free lanes. These are the free lanes. This additional 8 hot lanes that we'll be putting on this bridge is going to free up eastbound 7 to 16% more free capacity on the free lanes, and eastbound 8 to 39% depending on the time on the westbound. So a significant increase in the movement of traffic in that area. Safety, you look at the 630 interchange at 106 right up the road here. I mean, a significant reduction in fatalities that will result from these improvements. If you look at, in terms of economic development, the next one, that small project, the Parkway at Pope's Road, affects so many people getting their access to jobs. So economic development is considered. If you look out the western part of our strait, Interstate 81, having acceleration lanes in terms of accessibility and good movement makes those projects score very well. And this is a significant freight corridor. So 158,000 movements of freight there through that daily freight tonnage through there. So I just want to impress upon you, it's not just the sitting around. This is about a 5-month process to go through and score these. And again, they're developed at the local level, regional level with VDOT, scored independently. We have a robust also audit where we go in and make sure the scores, we test and make sure they score the same, so that we are not, we're getting good governance here, that people can understand their projects are getting a fair shake. Now, the funding two scenario that we did, quite frankly, we went right down the list, which I believe the legislation calls, and the highest net benefit score is what we funded in both the district and the high priority. We start with the district grants, then we have, consider those from MPOs, and as we fill those buckets up, then of course, you can determine to be just in a district, or you can determine to be across the state, and then we look at the remaining monies for the statewide projects. And if you go to the next slide, this is probably what everybody would like to see. This is the funding to recommended funding scenario. This is all the projects across the district and the statewide together. The recommended funding scenario based solely on the net benefit cost. So there was no, it's 5 months for the bank this, everybody can look at the stores, but solely, certainly Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia and Richmond were increased because they received monies out of the state highway, the state pot, the large pot, 64 high-rise, 264 interchange. Northern Virginia, there was about 12 projects that scored out of the statewide pot. But and we've seen between the 2 years an ebb and flow, and over the 2 years, every district has received high priority fund monies. So it's not a matter of one or the other, it depends on what you're scoring against in that year. So moving forward, we will meet in February, we'll begin the review of the recommended projects. We will be having public hearings across the Commonwealth, we'll be getting input, certainly we'll hear from you guys. If there is a revision to the funding scenario, that will be done in May, but it will be done in public after public hearings, and people have to stand up and say why they're doing it. Could be some good reasons to do that. Actually, there's about $50 million or so of unallocated monies, and so there is some additional monies as they work through here, so I expect to be some additions as we go through this process. And then at the June 16th CTV meeting, we will adopt the plan. Now, I actually think that this now allows the board to fulfill its responsibilities as a policy board through an informed project selection. Not just coming in and trying to figure out what the administration put on the table and see if we can get the most out of it. It's improved transparency from the very beginning of the score all the way through the end. Same way with accountability. Much more certainty for projects. One attribute has been more projects getting built, less projects having money. And that's because we're focusing on fully funding the project. But in actually delivering things people can drive on and ride on, we're significantly ahead. I'll share with that slide with you in a minute. And we're getting significant increases in a focus on achieving results that solve the problem, not what we can build. And I'll share a little bit about that with you as we go forward. First of all, what you see in front of you here, the next two slides, just briefly, are what your books are. And you can quickly go down to the left and see how this project scored on Smart Scale and where it stood in its district and statewide. So all these localities and MPOs and can now look at this. We have the next 5 months and they can tell us where we made a mistake or what they agree with and what we don't. So they can actually, something we can action. But right there, it'll tell you what it costs, where it is, and what its rank is. And if you really want to get into the details, the next slide, you can see right there where the points came from in those 6 categories and how you compare with the rest of the state. So not a matter of, well, I think my project's better. We can actually debate the merits of the projects as we go through. One of the things I wanted to point out before this process, as I said, we were allocating dollars. And if you look at some of the districts, we had 30%, 32% of the monies in Bristol were allocated to projects that weren't funded, fully funded. We had a lot of money sitting around the Commonwealth that we were hoping that maybe something would happen, but was not being used. Every district had money sitting on projects, and some of it could be $5 billion on a project that was $100 million. You know, big that was not going to get funded. So we are working that down so that our citizens know that every dollar is being moved towards moving a project, not sitting around hoping for something to come in the future. Now, a lot of this, publicity has been on the scoring, but let me tell you, the real benefits, I think, are for years to come in the Commonwealth. First of all, our engineers now in VDOT are saying, what do we need to do to solve the problem? It's going to score better if we build what we need and we actually solve the problem we're doing. I'll use the 64 widening right outside here from 295 to Bottoms Bridge. The original design was going to be almost $80 million for that few miles of widening because it was buying right away on the outside, which is the standard we do. The engineer said that probably didn't score well, wasn't going to receive money. He said, bro, I got interior right away I don't need to buy the right away. That was redesigned that way, and this project was funded because the cost came down for the benefits. Same amount of traffic going to move through there, same people, but for $20 million or so less. If you look at I-81, we were going to build an original design for a massive amount of taking an interchange. And yet, for a fraction of the price, we got most of the benefits. And let me point out that doesn't preclude us from doing anything in the future. But for a fraction of the price, we took care of the problem out there. So I just wanted to point out there's a lot of policy going on behind the scenes that are making us use our dollars more wisely. So this process was made possible, though, by some of the changes that this board and others within the Assembly helped us do in getting the rules changed. And that big part was House Bill 1887. We increased funding running through the formulas. It reduced the number of programs. I remember, I think I was here a couple years ago and I showed you a chart of all the revenues coming in, and I'm a CPA, I couldn't figure it out. There were so many pots of money. Now it all runs through here. There's not, pots of money hanging around. Smart Scale, it embraced Smart Scale by breaking it down into the different divisions. And here's the most important part. It increased the funding sent directly to the districts. Not at the state level, but at the district level. So where we are today, there are a few programs that don't run through Smart Scale, and that's because of federal requirements. The first is the federal transportation revenues that are particularly for a specific use, that don't run through Smart Scale. We have some specialized state programs that you guys have legislated to us: revenue sharing, industrial access, economic access, and recreational access. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. My personal opinion, we've been debating this on the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I'm not sure we're moving the needle with some of these, and I know JLARC's going to do a study we've looked at, and I think it's a good time to do that because we struggle with it's pretty prescriptive on what we have to give money to. I'm not sure we're moving the needle, so I think it's a great time that we are looking at that, going through there, and I'll come back to that. But all the remaining funds, now 45% come right off the top to go to our state of good repair, which is basically taking care of our current network. Because VDOT said for the next 10 years, that's what we're going to need to fund to keep our assets from going down and start bringing them back up to our mandated standards. And the remaining 55% is divided equally between the local and the regional and the state programs. Now, let me talk a little bit about revenue sharing. I've been on the board, I was on the Transportation Board since 2009. That was the year of right after the Great Recession. $1 billion was taken out of projected revenue funding for transportation. So we were deallocating projects. Revenue sharing at that time was about $15 million a year. It was a very small percentage of what we were spending. It became the only thing available because no money was running through the formulas. So it grew significantly. It went up to almost $200 million a year. And so what happened is a greater reliance was put on that because there were no other funds to go to. And not that it was bad, but it really then helped a lot of larger cities. I'm not saying that's bad, but they had more money to put on revenue sharing, and all of a sudden the program really got skewed one day, skewed in terms of where it was going. If you look at the graph, this shows it pictorially. The revenue sharing is the darker line, and the old formula As you can see, as the formula went down, revenue share lines started to escalate. But now, under House Bill 1887, we're putting money back in the districts. So what we're trying to determine, we're working through, is revenue sharing comes right off the top. If we take $1 off the top for revenue sharing, that means we've taken money that other districts can't use, or other statewide projects can't use. Comes right off the top. It's like saying, we favor these projects. I'm not suggesting it's not a good use, but I'm saying that what it was intended for was to supplement our main program. It became the only source. And so, if we were to increase, the next skill will go through this. Now, I know there's a lot of people saying we want to increase revenue sharing. Well, if we were to do that, right now we have it at about $100 million a year. I mean, it's still a robust program at 100, at 185, but at 100. If we were to increase the program $50 million a year over our 6-year improvement plan, that would require another $250 million to come off the top. That would mean there would be $900 million available for the revenue sharing program. That is almost $150 million more than we would have to allocate to Smartsville. So that's why, we don't think that was the intention of these new formulas, was to say we're going to pull everything off the top and only run a few things through. And so that's why we're looking at the CTB as saying 100 million seems to be the right number. But if we need to adjust it, we'll put it up or down. But think about this. A lot of things that people were using for revenue sharing are now being funded. State of good repair. I've been to many towns and they had a bridge. They had to put revenue sharing on it. Well, now we're just fixing that bridge. So that's why I say we need to give it a couple more years to see before we make any decisions of one-offs on these programs. And so just point that out. Now, while I'm on this slide, I would also point out if there was a project, and there's a couple bills this year, that says, I want my project funded. Well, if that happens, it comes right off the top. So all those allocations I just showed you get reduced. And I can show you the projects that will not be funded if we do that. I don't think that was the intention of the legislation. But there are a few of those out there, and hopefully we'll work with the sponsors and find ways to deal with those. But again, anything that comes off the top reduces everybody else's share of what can be awarded. So, if we looked at what we've done with Smart Scale, we have a couple pieces, and I don't want to call it cleanup legislation, but it's sort of documenting what we've done and making sure these gains that we've gotten, working with you, remain in place. And those are two House bills, or House Bill 2241, Senate Bill 1331, that continues some of the putting into code the things that we put in action. For instance, it requires the release of the scores. Right now, the law says they got to give you 30 days. We're saying, no, we need to give you 5 months. There's no reason we rush this through in 30 days. It ensures the objectivity and the project evaluation by separating project development from project programming. Programming, or how the money's allocated, my reading of the code, you delegate it to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. That's the oversight committee to report through you, not defaulting to VDOT. Not being critical of VDOT, but they're developing the projects. They shouldn't score them, and we should be setting the oversight of what these projects are in a long-range plan. So that's what this is. It is not reducing the staffing at VDOT. It's not getting rid of anybody. It's making sure that the Commonwealth Transportation Board sees what the programming is before the plate is set, so they can report to the General Assembly and to the executive branch. And it requires the Commonwealth Transportation Board to set performance measures. Now, that doesn't mean how many cars go through here. It basically means, are we meeting the objectives? Are we moving the needle? One of the things that I've found, we don't go back and evaluate all this stuff. Did we actually fix what we said? We now have the ability to do that. We can go back and say, we put these projects in. Did we increase throughput? Did we increase economic development? That's what the Commonwealth Transportation Board will be charged with in this bill. So it is not eliminating anything. It doesn't diminish the roles or responsibilities of the Commissioner of Highways one bit. It is to enhance the oversight to make sure we're actually moving the needle. One more quick thing I'll take you through, because it was a major change, and that was our public-private partnerships. One of the things that, when we came into office, working with many of you and the governor, is we needed to make sure we protected the taxpayers. And P3s are a procurement. They're a procurement vehicle. They're not a funding vehicle. They're a procurement vehicle. And they should only be used when they're in the best interest of the public. We need to deliver the project that best meets the needs, and I think we need to be transparent and accountable. Now, I have found, I was in private, this is my first time in the public arena, but I found the best way to get projects to fruition and make the best decisions is be as accountable and outright as you can be. That keeps us making right decisions in that. So that was the purpose behind some of the reforms. We did this under the transform the outside of the beltway, and I'm not going to rehash all what we did last year in that regard, but this was the first one procured under the new reforms. Now, again, we believe, I look at this, when Governor McAuliffe asked me to do this, I did not view myself as in a political position. I've never been in a political position. I said I would look at this as I was running, like I did my businesses, running transportation. So I would only use or buy something if I thought it was in my best interest. And in this case, the best interest of the public. So in terms of looking at P3s, we believed it was important to have a baseline. If I were building a hotel or building anything, I wouldn't know how to negotiate if I was going to bring a partner in like Mr. Massey, who would want to charge me an exorbitant amount to be my partner. I wouldn't want to know if that was a good deal unless I, for myself, determined what I thought it was worth. Didn't mean I was right. It just knew what I was negotiating from. And so developing the cost from a public option was key to our leverage and understanding the deal. It doesn't mean we're going to default to do the public option. It simply means I don't know how to negotiate if I don't know what it's going to cost me to do it. That's a significant leverage and the key part to being able to negotiate fairly in these deals. We also recognize that many of the deals change because once you go sort of sole source and negotiations begin, it's hard without competition. In fact, if you know you're the only one playing, I'd love to be in those positions. It certainly puts the leverage on the other side. That's not to say anybody was trying to do anything nefarious. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying it's just good business practices. We established an open and accountable process, and we really embraced the reforms of House Bill 86 when we did this. Now, the way we used to do them in the Commonwealth was it was called a money for value analysis, where we had the P3 office look at all the different risks in a P3, construction, operation, maintenance, and they evaluated based on trends across the country what they thought that risk was worth. Well, I will tell you, I've never been in any deal that the risk is always the same. I don't care if they're identical concepts. For instance, if we're sinking a tunnel in the Elizabeth River, the construction risk on that's a whole lot different than widening 66 in Northern Virginia, because it's in the same right-of-way. But yet, we were still discounting the risk the same percentage, because that's what the average of percentages were across this area. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. But based on that analysis, the original thing when we came into office was it was going to cost us $1 billion to get 66 procured. It would be $1 billion of public financing. And we weren't going to get multimodal benefits. That's what the money for analysis showed. So we started over. And what we said was we believed all the risks were different. And we need to, first of all, determine what it would cost us to do it. In fact, we came to you and said we would particularly like to issue, if we could issue non-C debt, which doesn't affect our debt capacity, that would be a good way to look at this project. It doesn't mean we wanted to do that. It meant we had to look at what it would cost us before we could negotiate. So that was a key component as we looked at how do we make sure these deals were consistent with protecting the public? Are we accomplishing the project we want? How much does it cost? What are the revenues and what are the risks? I mean, these seem to be, to me, pretty basic principles for anybody that's ever run a business. So what we came up with and looked at is said, no, we don't think we have to put $900 to $1 billion. We think our public option, or our subsidy should be somewhere between $400 to $600 million, and we believe there could be monies to support multimodal in the corridor. Doesn't mean we're right. I mean, that's our analysis. Now, we did verify that by going to a lot of public and private sources, but at least it gave us a position to negotiate from. And then what we said is, look, we're sure that the private sector can beat these terms. And we put them right out there and said, if you can beat these terms, we want to have you as a partner. And that's what we did. But we said we're going to keep this on the table until we get all the way through. Because if you don't believe we can build this, then our negotiating leverage or our competitive, I won't call it edge, but equality goes away. And so we issued our RFQ for different ways to look at the project. First of all, to verify that in fact that our numbers were based on not just what VDOT said, but what the private sector was giving us ranges. And based on that, in terms of House Bill 1886, we felt it was in the best interest of the Commonwealth to move forward as a P3. And we issued an RFP, a P3 being a total concession. In June of July 29, we had 3 teams that initially were in. 2 teams ended up submitting qualified bids. Now, I want to make sure you understand what a qualified bid is. That wasn't just them saying they would do it. That was having a rating agency tell us they could finance it. They signed off on their benefit analysis cost. They could finance the project. And they said we can beat you having to put up $600 million and deliver these projects. So we went from thinking we're going to have to spend $1 billion to thinking that, no, it's probably more in the range of $600 million to the winning teams bid, which you see on the right. Not only did we have to put the money up, but they were paying us a concession fee to have the right to those revenues and $800 million for transit capital and operations and $350 million of quarter improvements and no continuing liabilities. It's the first time the Commonwealth has used a competitive bid process through the entire process. Now, in other words, again, not saying anybody did anything wrong, but it was competition all the way through. Now, I went back and when we decided to go through this, one of the first things I did when I came in is compared all the other projects that we did under P3s, or the major projects. The downtown Midtown Tunnel. And you can see that project was about almost $2 billion. Very little private equity was put in the deal. And here's the key. They believe, we didn't price it, we'd be in the state, but the concessionaire believes there's $700 million of continuing liabilities to the state, because if we build another tunnel in Hampton Roads, or another river crossing, or expand the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, that's a compensation event to them. I'm not saying I agree with that, but that's what they believe. So there's a continuing obligation there. If we impact their revenues by expanding, it's right in the contract, if we impact them, we have a compensation event to the Commonwealth. 460 was a project that it started out to be totally tolled. It ended up being no private monies put in. For other reasons, the project didn't go forward, but that project didn't come to fruition because the private sector said it's not worth it for me to do this on. The 95 express lanes, which we have a great partnership with Transurban, I think it's a successful P3 deal, but we do have some continuing obligations with them. If HOV usage gets over a certain amount, the Commonwealth has to pay that. It's a 68-year deal, I believe, or a little longer, maybe a little longer than that. We're at 33% today in that range, so there's no doubt in my mind, because that's a stated policy of the Commonwealth, we want more HOV, more fruit through there, that we're going to have some continuing obligation. That is not meant as any way negative to the concessionaire. It's the terms of the deal. And that's why I say each deal was different. But if you look at Transform 66, there's $1.5 billion in private equity. That's 3 to 4 times more private equity than all the other bills combined, other deals combined. So, and we have no future liabilities. We have no HOV usage requirement. We have no alternative facilities charge. And that was because we negotiated from a competitive position in that. If you just, the next slide just goes through and just compares the competition, the major business terms, we established them right up front. So here they are. And by the way the law works, if we change it, we had to come back to the committee because I have to sign as secretary and say, we delivered a project which you approved.
Before you go to the next one, if you go back to page 46, on the Midtown Downtown, the 582, that's the total we put in to date, which is that the additional money is to buy down the tolls?
That's correct. We were only supposed to put in about $112 million.
Right, and so had we done that up front, we probably would have had the toll until the project was completed, and the tolls probably would have been a lot less.
Yes, if that money, when we put, and I came to, when we bought the toll, well, first of all, the Governor McDonald's administration brought down the first one because there was a public outcry. That was $108 million, $112 million the first time because there were going to be tolls charged before construction, and there was a public outcry. And they were still going on when we came in. I came to you and I said, you know, it's the right thing to do to the public. It's a poor use of money. And if you understand the way these deals work, equity up front, you know, buys down the whole deal across the time. But when you come back later, you're just buying down revenues. And so had we put this money up front, we would not have needed a partner on this deal. If we would have looked at, I believe, what it would have cost us to do, and we knew we were going to put in $500 million, I'm going to explain a little bit in a minute, we can borrow when I say we, it would be a third, not recourse debt to the Commonwealth, but revenue bonds supported by the project. That can be done as a public or a private entity. So, yes, had we looking for the Monday morning quarterback, fully admit that, we would have been better off doing this deal ourselves. And that,
Landon has a question. Okay.
so, and I actually believe had we looked at the public option, not that we would do the public option, but it would have pointed this out to us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I've gotten some questions on two things. What happens if things go south on these deals? And by the way, the 66 deal was no different than any of the other deals we've done in case we were running into issues. All debt on these deals is non-recourse to the Commonwealth. Non-recourse, totally the recourse of the project. In this particular case, we have $500 million concession payment that's provided up front at financial close. No contingent performance on the asset. That's our money. They put in $1.5 billion. So if they were to go belly up, let's say they would have lost $1.5 billion on the deal before it even got to us. And in the event of bankruptcies, the bankruptcy would have to take the toll road over, but under the same terms of which the concessionaire had. So nobody's hoping they default. But we have performance bonds in place during the construction. So from this perspective, if you look at the other deals, you walk away, if you default, you don't leave much equity on the table. Not so in this deal. They left $1.5 billion on the table. So there's no guarantees in the future, but certainly they put their money where their mouth is. They don't believe they're going to default because they've got so much equity invested in this. And by the way, you all know what equity, that all goes to the bondholders if you go in any type of default. So I'm not hoping for any issues. We've already had one. We had one here in Richmond, the Pocahontas Parkway, and it worked the way it should have. State wasn't responsible. Concessionaire bore the risk and moved on. So I certainly don't believe and hope anything goes south, but I am very comfortable in saying that the Commonwealth is protected if it does go south. And here's a real key important part. We started from the beginning, we were going to do it ourselves. We negotiated from that. So we know where the risks are. We know what we've agreed to. So if we were to have to take over, I'm very comfortable we could do that. one other thing on this page is not identified here. Other people say, well, can we take the $500 million and buy down tolls? Can we reduce the tolls? If it were a fixed toll, the answer would be yes. But these are dynamic tolls. These are tolls based on the rate of usage. In other words, you have a free lane and a tolled lane. The tolled lane is low when the free lane is moving faster, right? Because you're not often to benefit. If the free lanes are moving, why go on the toll lane? And actually people misunderstand because the toll lanes are really the free capacity of the free lanes. I'll explain that. So what happens is, if traffic jams up, people make decisions, I'm gonna get in the toll lane. Well, the more people get in the toll lane, the higher the toll is, because you are requiring a 50, minimum 45 mile an hour by the federal law, but a higher target. So as that degrades, the toll goes up. And by the way, it looks like on 95, we freed up 20% usage of the free lanes by offering people an option to do that in that regard. So, in that case, the tolling revenues, the equity, if we gave it back, we would just be giving it to the concessionaire's profit. The tolls are going to be the same no matter what. Fixed toll would be different. That's what we did have to do. We could take them and buy it down because it's the same time. Not the case with the dynamic. So the $500 million, I would definitely recommend we not give back to the concessionaire in that regard, because that would just be increasing their profits and the way the tolls work. Now, I believe there were some components why we were successful, not only because the legislature gave us the tools in terms of saying, hey, we'll consider you doing it as a public option if we don't get a fairly negotiated deal. The governor also understood, and I don't mean this to be critical of any governor, but if you think about this, you've only got 4 years, and if you're out there saying that's my #1 project and I want to have that done before I leave office, it's pretty hard to negotiate. And I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying, when I was in the private sector, I used that. I mean, I knew the other side had to get something by a certain date. It's just human nature. So Governor McAuliffe was basically saying, don't bring us a bad deal in that. And you guys embraced the reforms and worked with the staff and gave us the tools. The public option being on the table is the key to negotiating these deals. I don't expect every deal people to hand us a bunch of money. That's competitive prices. If you don't have competition, you don't know what motivates someone to buy. They may have had a tax consequence they needed to invest. They might be earning negative interest rates in Spain. I don't know. But that's not my response. I'm not counting their money. I'm just counting the Commonwealth's money. The competitive process helps us. And by the way, I should point this out. To think we're going to out-negotiate these guys, these are some of the most skilled negotiators in the world. Some of the most skilled negotiators in the world. What we did is we said, here's our terms. If you want to change them, then we got to go back and start over. So that helped the state and us negotiate because, I've been in private business, but I'll tell you, these guys' attorneys will get more than I paid my attorneys. They've seen these deals all over the world in that. And so, again, the detailed business terms were outright, and that drove the procurement. So, one of the things we're also doing this year, working with you, is making sure we put down some of those things in code. So that's the way we go forward. It's not meant to dictate, and I keep getting asked, can we replicate? Every deal's different, but there's certain things you can do to make sure you're setting yourself up. It doesn't keep you from making a bad deal. It keeps you from possibly doing something that just doesn't make any sense in there. But these are some, Chairman Jones again is carrying this bill, and all it's doing is simply putting in place the processes that we use for 66, having the Secretary establish a baseline, making sure we compare that to the public contribution, making sure that we have a competitive process. And most importantly, we have to brief the Transportation 3-3 Committee, keep them involved. It doesn't mean that if you don't get what you want, you can't do it. It gives you the opportunity, though, to say, we still want to do it, instead of it being the fault. So that's what it is, and I'll end on, Mr. Chairman, on this. I think there's two keys. I know I've done a lot of material, but two keys here. We are now focused on projects instead of allocations. We are actually producing results. And I said this last one, there are consequences to limited resources. I'm not trying to be flippant. I actually think some of them were good. I mean, I think Smart Scale has really driven a lot of ingenuity in our processes. But also, I can give you a list of projects and say, if you think they're worth investment in the future, here's what you can do. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but at least you can look at that. I go back and say, when I came into office, what I found is still true. We have great agencies. Where I found we were having difficulties understanding how to evaluate risk and our allocation of our resources. And I think working with you and this legislature has helped us put better processes in place. So, Mr. Chairman, that's where we are today, where we have been, how it works, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions if there are any of the members.
I've got Delegate Landis, I've got Delegate Garrett, Delegate Poindexter. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, first of all, I want to thank you not only for the presentation, but all the good work you are doing and VDOT's doing related to those of us that represent the corridor along Interstate 81. I apologize for not being at the meeting you had earlier in the week, but we'll catch up with you and get updated on kind of where we are along the corridor. But along those lines, and this is something you and I have talked about, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me, 81 and other projects, if the Congress and the new president move forward with infrastructure investment, I would very much like us to be ready to offer them projects that both VDOT and, from our standpoint, the legislature would like to see move forward. I know along the Interstate 81 corridor, there are many projects that could benefit the commerce that travels through the Commonwealth and in the Commonwealth that uses that corridor. So, are there any plans from the governor's standpoint? I know he knows the president-elect. He's even mentioned that he contributed to his first campaign, and I know he has no problem picking up the phone and calling folks that he knows. But are there any plans in the works right now to prepare for that hopeful eventuality?
The answer is yes. In fact, we have been reached out by the President-elect Trump's transition team. They have asked us for a list of projects. 81 is a project that we have put on there. So far, though, they have very much specified, is there an opportunity for additional revenues? They've been looking quite at tolling and different things. But that is one that is on there. By the way, if in fact there are other monies, this process, we work at a Smart Scale, we have a pipeline of projects. So if money comes our way, unlike many states, we've got projects ready to move forward, a pipeline. 81 in particular, and I'll talk to you about this. That's the one, we've got a plan that we increase throughput in areas, but we don't have a master plan for 81. It's billions of dollars in that regard. But the way our laws are, we are set up, if there's special money specifically designated, we are set up and we do have plans in place for that. And I also want to mention, I know there's a couple bills about coal fields and 460. We don't need law. We're set up. If there's specially designated monies, the way our laws are, we are ready to go. And I know we're hopeful. I've had a chance to review President Trump's transition. If it's P3s, well, we'll take advantage of that to the extent it makes sense. But we do have a pipeline, and I'm very comfortable that we could respond, not just in surface transportation, but I know you're going to hear from John Reinhardt on the port. We put that widening in there, but we certainly will be reaching out to get some projects from you, because I assume that'll be a developing process. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to echo the same sentiments. I deeply appreciate all the work you've done. Your sweat equity does not go unnoticed, sir. You've been personally engaged.
Good team.
I respect it. I appreciate it. But it comes from the top and it goes to the top. I do have a question about your two slides. I think it's 29 and 30 to deal with common sense engineering. You made a comment that I-64 widening from 295 was an $80 million project, and the engineers went back and re-engineered it, and then it became a $60 million project. The I-81 exchange at 17 was $157 million, and the engineers went and re-engineered it, it was $21 million. How do we make sure, give me a comfort level, sir, that going forward, every project is gonna be commonly sensically engineered? Here's my concern, Mr. Secretary. I'm not a highway engineer, an aggregate guy, or a design guy, an architect, or whatever. I gotta vote on all this stuff, but you all bring these projects to me. If now I have to, every time, ask the question, has this been commonsensically engineered? Is there a better mousetrap for this? I can do that, but we will spend a lot of time talking about how things are not as efficiently engineered. Somewhere there's a question in there. Help me get
No, we're in the same boat. I'm neither enlightened or encumbered by an engineering degree either. And part of it's a culture change because there's so many, rules, and they left to their own for a while. And I don't mean that, it's just the way it was. But I think that book you have right there, and they look to see how these projects are scoring based on the cost, is what's driving that. I can hear it when I go to these offices now, and I hear engineers, and they're talking about, well, that didn't source it. Well, that's $200 million. That type of stuff. So part of it is the culture, and it's going to take a while. And right now, they don't get rewarded if it costs too much. So at least we're starting to narrow the funnel down in that regard. I will tell you, it's also public sentiment. There's an interchange in Blacksburg where we can solve the problem with called an R cut. Now, you've exhausted my expertise in engineering traffic, but basically cutting through the engineer like an R, it's roughly $3 million. Fixes the problem. But the residents said, well, we want a new interchange. It's $50 million, roughly. And so the town said, we want to pull the R cut back and we want to put the interchange in. Well, I said, well, the R cut solves the problem. It's not that if the interchange solved the problem, the R cut didn't. But that's the time, so it's going to take a while for the public and that, but I'm comfortable from VDOT's perspective. They've embraced it, the district engineers, particularly, I know Chris in your district, they've embraced it, and they understand the scoring process. That's why they can't score it, because, certainly, but they developed it, and I believe you're going to see that. It's going to take some time, though, sir. I mean, I can't say, but they don't get rewarded. You only get rewarded if the project scores well. So we may not have it totally down, but I think we've narrowed it down quite a bit. But it's going to be over time.
And Scott, if I can, a good example is going to be on the peninsula, 64. For years, we were buying right away outside, and they came back, and they've been able to, we saved, okay, how much we're going to pay out segment 1, now we're on segment 2.
I mean, hundreds of millions.
Starting to grow up now. And so now we put so much more money into now segment 3, we'll be so far ahead of schedule on that, I forget how many total miles segment 1, 2, and 3 are. But that's what
21 miles.
21 miles. That's what happened down in Hampton Road. Save substantial dollars, which will allow the second phase to go. Even when they were bidding the second segment, when the first segment was just underway, and we saved significant dollars in that regard. It is a culture.
It is, and I want to say, under Todd Kilpatrick, they're embracing this. I mean, they're not saying, oh, they're embracing it. Does it mean it's all the way through? No, they are embracing it.
And then one last thing that wasn't in your presentation, I don't think, 64, you have incentives to be done early.
Yeah, I should have mentioned
And
that.
I can tell you from driving back and forth home, Stiley and the others, there's a lot of asphalt that has been put down, and I mean, they are ahead of schedule, and the bridges, it's just amazing to me to see what has occurred in that corridor in the last 6 months.
So when we were looking at what the cost of a project is, we never considered the cost of the public. In other words, the best way, if you're building something, it's a whole lot easier building it from scratch than tearing it apart and redoing it. Okay, and so what we were doing is saying we don't want to inconvenience the public, so we're stretching it out over long periods of time. It's going to be a cheaper cost. Now, we went back and we said, no, what we want to do is get in and get out. And by the way, when you pay an incentive, you don't have any subsequent claims. So we're actually finding the costs are cheaper by incentivizing them. So it's really bringing those type of business or entrepreneurial type of skills. And I know they can't go so far, but certainly in performance contract management, they can certainly be utilized.
Delegate Poindexter and Delegate Lingenfelter.
Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, appreciate where you're going, your leadership on what's been going on in the department. Excellent briefing today. One of your charts addressed some things, some types of projects that are not smart scale.
Yes, sir.
I think you know what my question's going to be. One of them is Route 58, which is, as far as I can tell, the Bastard Road chart, project in all of Virginia for the last 20 years is funded out of general fund and so forth. The General Assembly provided money for that coming up in 2020. That road needs to be built for economic development as well as safety purposes already. I understand the port is expanding over the next year or two, maybe 2 million more containers coming in and out. So my concern right now is whether we will be ready under contract, under procurement, ready to roll the bulldozers, if you would, come 2020 when the money is in the bank.
On 58.
Route 58 from Stewart out to 77. We have about 20 miles left to connect all the way from Virginia Beach to I-77, I-81.
Yes, sir. So there's two parts, as I understand it. There's the continuing of the money and getting making sure the bonds continue. Certainly support that, and certainly to support the continuing of the road. The issue is, and it's not because the contractor, this is more of a policy issue, and in that, sir, it's not that the contractor did a good job, but that was a sole source project. And so I have, not because of the contractor's performance, but have an issue, I just want to make it in terms of giving anything sole source. So all I was suggesting, I'm not saying we've made the decision, I want to keep the project rolling, is get the project to the design and then have a competitive bid to complete the project. That's not to say that the current project person won't be the ones doing it. I think they're doing an excellent job. But I do think that based on my reading of the laws in the Commonwealth and the way we changed, it needs to be competitively bid. But in terms of the commitment to the road, sir, there is no issue in that.
Mr. Secretary, don't take me wrong, I'm not pushing to do, I don't care how you do it.
Just want to get it done.
What I want to do is start the bulldozers in 2020 when the bonds pay to where the money is available to VDOT to start the bulldozer.
Yes, sir, and I think that's what they're going to let the contract, the engineer, to make sure that's done. And I will give you my word, I'll follow up on that.
Mr. Secretary and Delegate Poindexter, we had a conversation last week about the TPTA. That's under the old, they were grandfathered kind of sole source, so they're going to do it under the new process to be put in place. And it's nothing injurious to the existing contract, just good business practice to do it this way.
Yeah, I will not let it slow it down.
Yeah, like I say,
Yes, sir.
we do it the right way.
Yes, sir.
But I want to be ready, and I think all of us would look bad, including VDOT, if that didn't happen. My second question.
Yes, sir.
Back to the projects in round 2, score and the smart scale. What happens to those that were below the cutoff?
Okay, so one of two things. There is some unallocated monies that they could be talked about and receive some funding depending on the district. Also, in this year's round, and this happened last year, when you get down to the last 2 or 3, and I don't mean that to be disparaging about the project, but the project scores are very close to the next one that didn't get done. And so the local CTV member has the option to go back and talk with the region and determine, hey, we've got some money, we can do this project, and they work through that. But it's not done out of the public eye. It's done in public. Everybody sees it, they can comment on it before we do it. Or, and what's happened this year, they go into the next round of scoring. They don't go away. In other words, there are many projects this year that got funded, but didn't get funded last year. So that doesn't mean the project go away. There's a fourth alternative. Some of the people go back and say, I didn't score well, come up with another alternative, and all of a sudden they got it done. Which back to Delegate Garrett's question about how do we get that, again, it forces people to go back and say, well, maybe there's another way to do this. So they do not go away. In fact, the intent of this law is you keep going on down. And we've got several $1 billion still more to go. Yes, sir.
Doug Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Secretary, breath of fresh air. I really think you've done tremendous work in clarifying a number of these issues for us. And it's very, very helpful for a citizen legislator to be able to get a very clean picture of what's going on, so I commend you for that, I commend your team for it. I also would like to piggyback, Mr. Chairman, on a question by Delegate Landis. I think we are at a key opportunity to quote, "put it right," unquote. If the Congress is inclined to do something in infrastructure, we want to get the best, most accurate put forward. And I believe that you have vectored us in the right direction here. One thing that I would just request is that as you and the administration think about going forward with a put, remember that roads and bridges aren't our own and only infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
We have a huge stormwater issue that must be addressed by 2025 in Virginia. And sometimes when you build roads and you build bridges, you have the opportunity to also integrate some of these other infrastructure things like stormwater runoff and so forth. And I hope that when we go forward, Mr. Chairman, that we think about what component is in a federal infrastructure bill that might come in our direction, because that would be hugely helpful to this body as we try to address the Chesapeake Bay piece. And here's a question for you, and then I'm finished. Sometimes you get a project that's not fish or fowl. It doesn't fit very well inside your formula, but the irritation factor is so high that you just have to find a way to scratch the itch. And there are two of them in Northern Virginia I know you're aware of. You're certainly aware of the congestion at 610.
Yes, sir.
You know, as we cascade off, you got a plan for that. You're moving forward with, you know, the expansion down towards Massaponax and so forth. And hopefully that will help at least cascade some of the problem. I gotta tell you, we have a headache of a choke point. And I know every member here that's been in Northern Virginia and headed south at 5 o'clock in the afternoon has been in that choke point. And that's that 123.95 where you're kind of restricted. And I just hope that, you know, I don't know where it scores. I haven't looked. I'll go down in the book and look and see where it scores and so on, but good grief. I mean, that is, I mean, it's like we did it to ourselves. We didn't find a way to widen that section of 95 when we were also doing HOT. So I hope that you will look into that and try to find a way to integrate this sort of, this one project into something. So I just offer that to you.
Just a comment, sir, on your first comment, you're right, I've heard it said, you don't know what your view is till you get the next step of the ladder. And now that we've gotten here, I think there's a whole lot more that we can do. I've heard this job, and you know, I'm getting the 4th year, and the best way to describe it, it's been a lot of long days, but short years. I mean, it just seems like the time's flown by, but I think there's a whole lot more that we can get accomplished in that. In terms of those type of projects, remember, there are those other special programs, plus VDOT has a maintenance budget of about $2 billion a year. The maintenance budget has a lot of leeway, in terms of that. So that is one of the things we're cognizant of. We don't want to take everything else so structured that we can't deal with problems. I'm comfortable. I haven't seen one yet that we haven't found a way. Now I say that without jumping ahead in that regard, but if truly a safety issue, those things got to get addressed. I mean, just the way it is. So I'll continue to encourage them to look at that, sir.
Hello, James.
Sure.
I'm working on it.
Okay, thank you. Well, no,
That's an entertaining joke we have.
Mr. Chairman and the rest
It
of
must
the
be
committee,
telepathy.
that's an inside joke. Every day when I see him, I ask him if he has, if the secretary has worked on our little problem we have with Portsmouth and the downtown town. But I just wanted to say that, I do appreciate your creativity. I do appreciate the time. I would just say, I would be remiss if I didn't say, just reserve a little bit of time for that problem that we talked about with the Midtown Zone. As recently as last night, talking to some folks who are actually contemplating moving from my whole city because they can't absorb $10,000 a year in tolls. And I know you've done a great job in reversing the problems of that deal. None of us had anything to do with buy down to the toll, I understand the policy, I agree with that. But just keep a little bit of that, if you find that rainbow at that pot of gold, think about citizens of Portsmouth and Hampton Roads. But I don't wanna throw cold water on what you've done. I appreciate it, just keep up the good work, just keep working on it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
and that's a great thing to end on, because I think we've had a lot of great questions. The way it's presented to us is what we have done over the last handful of years. And it hadn't been by accident or happenstance, it's been by a lot of hard work with a lot of members in the dais here and in the assembly. But to the question that Delegate Langenfelter had and you just had, temptation to get outside the navigational buoys on what we've done to try to take care of one-offs is something that we need to resist because of just what you just said. Yeah, and the problem, that we've got with the Midtown Downtown is it is a legally signed deal that on the front end, our hands are tied for the first certain number of years because of the bondholders exception. And it's just, I go through it not as many times as your constituents do. It's something that really is, the project is great, but the deal's terrible. But, I think the best thing that I've heard in the last handful of days, I went last night over to the thing they had for the CTV, and I had a member tell me, I'm not sure I'm gonna have to be reappointed, because all, tough work's done, so to speak, is just blocking and tackling now, which states that this work, what we have done, puts a roadmap in place for the work to be done, it needs to be done. We provided the assembly, the 2313 speaker's leadership, and et cetera, to put the funding out there. And the good news is for our constituents, you can see the benefit of that when you're riding around. Delegate Watts, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, had a tour for Northern Virginia, what they're doing up there, see what's happening in Hampton Roads. And so we need to be ever vigilant to make sure we get value for what we're doing. And I just want to thank you, Aubrey, for what you have done and what Charlie and Nick and your team has done, because it truly is a team effort. It's no one individual. It's all of us working together to try to do what's in the best interest of our citizens and our constituents.
Thank you. And I also want to mention, I know the governor allowed us to do it, and I'm appreciative of his leadership in this too, and the working relationship we have with you. So thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you very much. Next we have John Reinhardt. John, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
I asked John to come and present to us this evening, or this afternoon, still this afternoon, get close to the evening. Last year we made a historic investment as a assembly and a legislature. And there's a lot going on at the Port of Virginia, a lot of good things. So I wanted to come today and give us an update as to where we are, where we're heading, and what we can expect as the year unfolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, committee members, it's a pleasure to be with you and to talk about what we are doing and also how we're implementing the historic investment you made in the Port of Virginia last year. As the chairman mentioned, there's a few items that we want to cover today. One is the port performance update. How's the port doing? Secondly, how is the project, the NIT project going? How is the big capital lease project going? And then talk about the financial update on the port a little bit. So I'll try to cover those points for you. On a fiscal year, or a calendar year performance, we had an outstanding year. The port just set another record. Its volume was up 4.2% year over year. Imports grew faster than exports. We increased our market share. We overtook New York City for the most rail cargo of any port on the east coast of the United States.
I know that because I go to Suffolk all the time.
Yes, sir. And there's some of those other projects that we have to talk about. But again, all the markers were good. The Port of Virginia's imports grew at 7%, 7.8% last year. East Coast overall grew at 2%. West Coast grew at 2%. So you can see we moved forward and we're the fastest growing import port in the United States. Cargo, we moved the 2.6 million containers, or TEUs, 37% by rail. So that was up 2 percentage points. 61% by truck, 2% by barge up and down the coast, but our Richmond Marine Terminal barge, we've got it to 20,000 units, and we're at 32.8% increase year over year, and we're bringing in a new barge later this month, so we can continue to use the waterway to bring the barge traffic here to Richmond. One of the advantages for Virginia now is that right on Christmas week, CSX finally opened the Virginia Avenue Tunnel in Washington, D.C. Up until this time, we've only had double stack with Norfolk Southern. Now we have double stack with both Class 1 railroads. It gives you a better network and opportunity to target some specific markets. So we're very pleased to have that. And again, 14% increase year over year on rail volume. This is just the rail network. I pointed out because we are looking with the Class 1 railroads to make sure we're harvesting some of the right hubs for growth so that we can continue to attract the volume growth through Virginia. This slide I've shared with you before is the inside-outside mix. We're working very hard on economic development across the Commonwealth, driving projects that will create the jobs here. But we also have to have that strategic focus on the larger market, the discretionary market, that is the 44 million people beyond the Commonwealth's borders. That makes you a hub and a point of focus, an important player as the ships get larger. We've continued to try to improve our brand and our impact on our local communities. If we look at economic development in 2016, there were 41 announcements in the Commonwealth because of companies that had something to do with the port, bringing their cargo in or out. That was the most we've done in one single year. That represents 3.5 million square foot of space that's under construction across the Commonwealth. The little dots on the map in the upper corner show you where those projects are, and those projects are either new construction or expansion of current facilities. So you can see it was a good spread across the Commonwealth. It's not just in Hampton Roads. As these projects are on stream, 3,800 jobs that have been created and more than $924 million invested in Virginia. Now, one of the things that this number does not include, and I wanted to share with you, is since before the recession, there has been no real speculative construction going on in the Commonwealth. We have lost a lot of economic development opportunities in Virginia because we didn't have shovel-ready sites or sites that were ready to be occupied quickly when the market was there. So in just the last 6 months, 1.3 million square foot of speculative space is being built around the Commonwealth. Some of that in the Hampton Roads area and Suffolk, a little bit up in the Winchester area, and we're working on some here in Richmond.
Several members have come to me about the Danville corridor.
Yes, sir.
58, looking at an inland port project potentially. They have worked very well together, the counties to put together some, sites that are ready for industry. Any thought, interest in that regard? You got that Route 58 corridor traffic. Just get an update if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. I think Senator Edwards has some legislation he's moving to try to have a study done for Roanoke for an intermodal facility. We have an MOU with Pennsylvania County where we're looking at a specific intermodal facility now. For an intermodal facility to work, it requires a few things. Direct access to the right roadway system so you can get the clustered work and the shorter traffic by truck. It has to have enough use so that there's a balance in and out. You can't do it just on one-way traffic or speculative. You have to have a community that's really ready to accept it. I think we lost an opportunity in the Roanoke area when we put the Heartland Corridor in because there was not a lot of acceptance of the Elliston project, or that might have gone forward. So you need a willing community. We're willing to research, observe, and we are participating in those searches. We just don't have a lot of economic capacity right now to just take a flyer.
Thank you.
We mentioned the new era has begun. Panama Canal opened on June 26th. We brought our first 10,000 plus TEU ship in July. So within 3 weeks of the Panama Canal opening, the ships got larger. Now we have ships much larger than this calling on a weekly basis. As we look at the networks that are coming in the spring, it's anticipated that we'll have 13,800 TEU ship calling to Port of Virginia sometime later this year. So that is in the planning with the carriers. And we also have rapid consolidation going on in the carrier industry. Last year there were acquisitions, a bankruptcy, and mergers underway. Now, I just wanted to show you, we had 4 alliances last year that controlled about 90% of the freight globally. You will now have 3 alliances controlling 91% of the freight. So it's consolidating, and part of that is also the drivers for the ships getting larger, because the only way the carriers can make money is to use a larger ship to reduce their slot cost and call fewer ports.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Who benefits most, of all those up and down the East Coast, is that being the trend as you sit today?
With the investments we're making and with the deep water we have and no overhead draft restrictions, we're putting a beacon out that Virginia, for the Mid-Atlantic and the whole Midwest is a magnet. New York will be there eventually because of the population. And then there will be somebody in the South Atlantic. It may be some combination of Savannah or Charleston, but those will be the three major hubs now that we've proved that we are ready and we're starting to harvest the real capability of our port.
Timing has hurt us in that regard with the consolidations. Probably helped this city.
Yes, sir, because if you take the economic risk, the question comes up, well, what happens if trade drops down? You know, you're putting all this capacity. Well, the carriers are still gonna go to larger ships and they're gonna take out some other ports, so secondary ports will be at more risk and they're going to try to drive their freight to the ports that have a good intermodal network that supply the supply chain. We are in the process and continuing the efforts. We're underway with our GRR with the Army Corps of Engineers because we are at 50 feet now. We're trying to go deeper to 55, which we are authorized to do at the federal level, and go wider. This is a critical port because it takes out tide restrictions. As the ships get larger and they're coming in fully laden, it allows us to make sure we don't have to wait for a tide. Secondly, we've got to go wider so that we can have two-way traffic so we're not trapping ships in the harbor or out at sea. Also, the wider helps us take care of the Navy. So we're on schedule, we're moving along. If you follow this schedule, by the end of 18, the whole GRR review, recommendation, and plan will be published, and then we'll go into the design and construction phases in the following years.
How are we doing on the design vehicle with the Corps?
Well, the Corps has a mandate to do design the best economical solution for the federal government's investment. And we've worked very hard to show them that the consolidation and the size of the ships are going bigger so that they don't use an older model that might only limit us to 51 or 52 feet. So we're doing okay. And we'll have more in March. All of the other modeling should be back soon. So we're trying to invest in the future. This is a picture of Norfolk International Terminal as it is today. The terminal that you gave us the capital to make our investments in, and I'll give you an update on how we're doing. Prior to that, a $350 million investment, we had already put $31 million on the north end. This is where we're building 26 new lanes. We only have 15 reversible lanes now, so we'll more than double our gate capacity, which will improve our service to the truckers and speed the flow of cargo. These 26 lanes will open in June of this year. We also pick up 12 acres of container storage space, which will become critical because as we go into the construction phase and take acreage out to modernize, we need to have some more room for containers. So this is a great project. It's on target. We originally wanted to have it done by the first of the year, but through the final design phase, we stretched it out to June, and we will take that. June becomes important for us in our business because that's really the beginning of the peak shipping season as you go into the fall and the holiday cargo. So we wanted to have it on there to make sure we serve our customers well.
We had Aubrey a few minutes ago. How's 564? How close are they going to be aligned?
About a year behind it, but we still will have the ability with Terminal Boulevard, which has been improved and repaved. We can still go Hamilton to Terminal or to Admiral Tussing until that's done. So this is really a positive step, and it will help us continue to expedite our cargo. Now, this is the slide that shows you what we will build with the $350 million. There will be 30 rail mounted gantry stacks. You can see the first set are running parallel with the berth, and then we turn and go perpendicular. That is being done because it's a bit of a narrow spot. We've already ordered the cranes, and I should let you know when we talk about view of Virginia in the global marketplace, we put together the cranes for this project and for the big project I'll talk about. We ordered 86 of these rail mounted gantry cranes, $217 million. It is the largest crane order in the history of the maritime industry. That means larger than any terminal in China or in Europe, done at one time. So the carriers and the shippers know Virginia is in this to grow quickly to develop capacity. So some of our milestones, we announced the investment, we started the order on the RMGs, we finalized that order, and we made the order for the 26, or the 86 Roanoke Gantry cranes. 60 of those are for NIT, so about 160 million of the 350 is all the order. So where are we? We are going to be 100% design complete by March 31st. We were looking at some of the impacts and how to make the most of that investment. We know how it's gonna lay out, but now you're getting all the detailed, civil work design completed. Bid process starts in April. We will award the contracts in June, and we will start work in July. This is also part of our plan to just be prudent and good stewards, and I'll show you that in a minute on a slide that shows how we're phasing it. So how is the money? You can see our full budget is $349,965,000. That's our forecast. We've spent $24.5 million thus far. We're working to only have the funds